The only time the World Cup was in the U.S. was in 1994, and there were 9 host cities, and Sprint became the sponsor, and it really was being a technology provider to the opportunity. So we, had a virtual network, and we linked the media center in Dallas, and so it really was the role of not only being a sponsor, but we're providing a tech solution here. So we work really closely with the World Cup organizing committee and their head of IT and head of technology and whatnot. But that was a case where in 1992, my boss, a guy George Rodriguez, came to me and said, "We've got this opportunity. We've made this investment. We need somebody to manage it." The downside is that on July 18th of 1994, you don't have a job. And so there was an expiration date on this thing.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun at all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today's episode is brought to you by Palacio and Partners, providing turnkey podcast creation, hosting, production, promotion, and related creative resources for you and your business. Today, Jeff is interviewing Mike Goff. Mike is the founder of Goff Plus Marketing, a strategic consultancy that offers C-suite level service and leadership to brands locally and nationally. He is also a partner in G4, a Kansas City-based consortium of 4 sponsorship activation, sports, and experiential-focused companies. Mike worked in a variety of roles for Sprint for more than 20 years, working on corporate partnerships with American Express, the World Cup, the NFL, and many others. He also received the Arthur E. Lowell Award, the highest honor of the local chapter of International Association of Business Communicators, given to those who have combined exemplary career accomplishments with ethical excellence and commitment to the local community. You can learn more about Mike at Goff Marketing, that's GOFF marketing.com. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Mike.
Mike, welcome to the Corporate Couch this morning.
Thank you, Jeff.
Oh, yeah. So we go back to May of 1990 at Sprint corporate headquarters, long distance corporate headquarters. You had come, I believe, from some ad agency, and I had come from another division of Sprint when I was in IT. And we sat next to each other.
Right.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that. And I think you might be the only guest, or one of the few, that I actually have worked for, albeit it was a brief time. So you were my direct boss. And I do want to talk about that performance review. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm excited to talk to you. You've done some legendary things. You're a great person. And we're going to have fun. I know you fairly well. So, but what, even if people that know you kind of, well, what one thing would surprise them about you?
I don't know if it would surprise them, but I think a lot of people don't know that I've got a journalism degree, but my dream was to be a sports writer. I wanted to cover sports, so that was coming out of J school at KU. That was sort of like the plan. And I actually had a job interview in Central Kansas and Abilene, Kansas. Went out for the interview. They offered me the job, on the spot, after we'd gone through, an hour and a half or so of conversation. And I'm driving back and I'm thinking to myself, and this is no offense to the great folks in Abilene, Kansas, but I thought, is that really where I want to go move? And do I want to spend my Friday nights, and Saturday afternoons covering high school football and, the things that I would be doing? And that was sort of one of those career moments where you decide to take a left turn versus, going straight. And I've told that story a lot when I have spoken to classes and whatnot, just to say, look, a career journey is a journey. It's not a straight line. It's not A to B to C. It's A to F to C to, whatever.
Oh,
But
yeah.
but I think that would be something a lot of people don't know about, is just that was sort of an initial focus, and look at me now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been reading your Substack articles. They're great, so you can see the writer in you, and you and after almost 22 years at Sprint, now T-Mobile, there could be a book in there, either a novel to protect the culprits, or or a full out show and tell, tell all.
Yeah, it might need to be historical fiction just to, protect folks. But writing is an outlet for me. So, I mean, that is something that I have tried to more intentionally, utilize as an opportunity for me to get thoughts out, not necessarily on paper, but in the digital world now.
I can't remember. You grew up in Kansas City?
Grew up in Leavenworth, Kansas,
Okay.
home of prisons and
Yeah.
forts, all the things. And
Yeah.
so I'm a local kid.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm a Kansas Cityan at this point, given how long I've lived in the area.
Yeah. Wayne Simeon, another Leavenworth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wayne Simeon, Melissa Etheridge. Her dad was my psych and civics teacher in high school.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
There you
Yeah.
go. Love
Yeah.
that. Yeah. What was fun for you growing up? What'd you love doing?
Playing sports. I was an only kid. My dad coached everything that I did. And growing up, it was baseball, football, basketball. It was
Yeah.
just like the
When the
rotation.
seasons changed, right?
Seasons changed. And I was small and slow, which isn't a good combination. So my athletic career ended around the time of, early high school.
Right.
But no, I love sports, and I think it was just growing up in that environment where it's just a part of your life.
Yeah, sure.
Even when you weren't playing and practicing, you were out at the ballpark, watching
Yeah.
friends play and whatnot.
Yeah. They said I had deceptive speed. I was actually slower than I looked. So so there you go. Did you have aspirations? I mean, obviously early high school, you said I'm not going to play in the NBA or NFL or MLB, but early on, was that an aspiration? Did you have any?
I didn't have sports aspirations. I think I realized fairly quickly that wasn't necessarily a path to pursue, but I did want to write. And like I said, I wanted to go into journalism, and the hope was that I would, become a sports writer. And I actually, after that experience with Abilene, kind of was looking at more PR related jobs where I'd still be writing, but there would be a business aspect to it.
Right.
And actually was a finalist for like a sports information director at KU, an assistant sports information director, and then an assistant sports information director job at the old Big 8 conference, and didn't win either of those positions. And so I was starting to say, okay, there's literally, God's got a plan, and I'm not, necessarily going down the right path because, the Abilene thing and then the two other jobs. So
Right.
again, it's just interesting how careers take shape, and how you end up doing what you end up doing.
Yeah. So what was your first job right out of KU, and how'd you get it?
Well, the first real job was at a place called Vance Publishing, and they were a publishing company actually based in Chicago, but they had an ag and livestock division based in Kansas City. And it was recruit kids out of KU and MUJ schools and just churn them through the business. And it was a job that had both an editorial or a writing component and then an advertising sales component. But that's where I got exposed to advertising and communications and business, and was just intrigued, sort of by the marketing aspect of it. We were dealing with brands, be they a grower shipper or a, sort of someone in the ag business. And I was just intrigued about brands going to market and how they, position their product and whatnot, which is sort of how I got into the advertising space and then ultimately into marketing.
Yeah, I'm very familiar, or was very familiar with Vance, because I was head of marketing for Bayer Crop Science. And,
Okay.
We were obviously big advertisers in their publications. Yes. Well, how did you kind of came into the end of the Mad Men era? So you you migrated to some agency life. So talk about that journey before you got to Sprint, and hopefully you can give me some great client after hours stories that people would want to hear.
So when I was advanced for, I think it was 3.5 years, and during that time moved from being kind of a field rep where you're out, in a territory, to coming back to Kansas City and being in national account sales, which got me exposed to ad agencies who were representing Bayer or other, major advertisers. And so I was really intrigued by the agency business and ultimately went to Valentine Radford, which was the precursor to what is now VML.
Right.
So worked with the V and the M and the L of VML,
Right.
John Valentine, Scott McCormick, and Craig Ligabell as part of that VR crew. And it was, that was really, I'd say, the beginning of what I really consider, a career focused on, becoming a marketer. I learned so much in that environment during those 8 years from a variety of people, and initially worked on a B2B account, and then ultimately came over and worked on the Hallmark business, which Valentine Radford got because Hallmark had decided to finally do local, retailer specific advertising, promotional advertising around Valentine's and Christmas and Easter and, Mother's Day. Whereas up to that point, they've been solely reliant on brand awareness work primarily through Hallmark Hall of Fame. So to be able to work on a brand of that stature, particularly being a Kansas City, and
Sure.
was a great adventure. And from there, went to another smaller ad agency before then taking the step to the client side with Sprint.
Yeah, interesting. So, yeah, another tie-in with my Bayer time was we were Valentine Radford's largest client. This was 2001. They had the business, I think, at that point for like 40 years.
A long
Bayer.
time.
Yeah, and I unfortunately, because obviously you were there in the heyday when it was one of the iconic agencies in Kansas City, as well as the heyday of Hallmark. So that was unfortunately for me, I was working with them kind of on the decline, and actually when Bayer got bought out by Aventis, or Bayer bought Aventis Crop Science, but we moved to Raleigh. It was an agency review, and Valentine Radford did not get it.
Yeah.
And that was the demise of basically Valentine Radford as we know it. So,
Right.
Yeah. So talk about, I mean, you did so many great things at Sprint, the World Cup '94, Rolling Stones tour in the mid '90s. I'm going to get to the fact of who actually idea was to put the Sprint logo on the NFL coaches' headphones when Sprint was the major sponsor of the NFL.
Right.
But yeah, talk a little bit about that migration, because you obviously didn't come in as the VP of corporate marketing. You and I had cubes next to each other. I think you had the American Express account, maybe. Relationship.
So I was hired to come in and manage that partnership, or be on the team managing that partnership, which was intended to take the Amex card, and back in the day, as you well recall, we had the phone card, which was a long distance calling mechanism, when you particularly when you traveled. And so the idea was to take the two cards and basically smash them together to where your Amex card allows you to also make long distance calls. The logic being people want less plastic in their wallet. You're taking the utility of two platforms and merging them together. So it was really, again, to be able to work on a brand of the stature of American Express and to get exposed to that culture, again, learned a ton, but also learned that consumers may say one thing, but they don't necessarily behave that way. So
Right.
there was research that said people want the utility and the convenience, but then when the product launches, sort of like, nah, they didn't mind carrying two pieces of plastic. And I think it was moderately successful, but it certainly, didn't sort of take off the way that Sprint, I know in particular, would have expected. But that also then morphed into how do we use sort of the phone card as an acquisition device. And I think, that sort of free calling idea was during the day of, I forget the term, but basically some illegitimate switching, practices that took place.
Yeah, we were the precursor of the AOL sending out their discs free. You can get them at grocery stores. They mailed. One of the biggest faux pas of my career, I had come from IT. I basically knew enough about marketing, which I basically learned in, undergraduate and my graduate degree. But, we had to do a mailing to all active phone card customers because of some rate change. So I'm new. This is like right in the night, right when we started.
Right.
And I'm a literal person. They said just all active phone card users. Well, you just looked up in the customer database, status equal A, and you mail them. All right. Yeah, easy. So my team pulled it, mail out the thing. Box. I don't know if you remember this. Boxes of undeliverable mail came. I mean, like they had a whole conference room of. It was because they just gave out stuff for years. I mean, like free phone cards,
right?
And then they tagged them active. Now, the right question or the right criteria would have been activated phone cards that they actually had used them.
Right.
Yeah. So that was a big learning lesson. Like, oh yeah, I need to check. Like, we don't even have 7 million customers. But we just sent out 7 million pieces of mail.
Right. So the Amex thing then led into, hey, we've been using the phone card as a tool to partner with other brands, which sort of set me again down that partnership path. So, there was American Express to start, but then did deals with Burger King, HBO, a brand no longer alive called Blockbuster, again, where they're trying to get either more subscribers or add value to existing customers or bring traffic into their retail locations, again, offering a free phone card, if you buy X or if you sign up or you do whatever.
Yeah.
That was really my sort of like foray into partnership marketing and understanding how to manage relationships.
I moved from AT&T, when I joined, it was the biggest company in the world. Then they divested their, the local divisions, and I worked for the long distance division alone. Then migrated over to Sprint long distance, and Sprint long distance was about, I'll say at that time, it was only about 18 months old when you and I joined, give or take, and. But the culture difference from AT&T, kind of the big Ma Bell, to Sprint was a lot different. And I'm just wondering how different it was for you coming from the agency side to a client side. Because I'll say, residential marketing where we worked, I mean, it was, a lot of type A personalities walking around,
right,
trying to do a lot of things, and maybe for the good of the company or maybe for the good for them. But I'm just curious what your take on it.
It was a dramatic difference for me, and coming from an ad agency environment that clearly you've got a lot of creative types. It isn't a process rich environment. Clearly you've got to hit deadline, and you've got to put great work product out on behalf of clients. But to walk into an environment at the time like Sprint, where there was so much process, particularly with the Sprint Amex relationship, where there are sort of systems that have to marry to one another or talk to one another, and that was a space that I had never dealt with, in my ad career. Given the clients that I had worked on, so having to learn that piece about the fact that we're a network, that's our product, the systems that you have to go through to get things done internally. It really was a cultural shift for me in terms of how to get stuff done within that environment.
Yeah, especially in terms of it was, it was the early days, and there were a lot of hodgepodge systems, and it was, a little bit of a mess, really.
Yeah, there were days when it's like I literally felt like I didn't have a clue what people were talking about.
Yeah.
Or why it was so difficult to take this and just, why don't they work together?
Yeah, it was probably me telling you we couldn't do it.
Probably.
So, sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, just talk about some of the major things that you were involved in the NFL sponsorship, like I said, World Cup, Rolling Stones tour. I know we brought in a lot of athletes in the fray: Peyton Manning, Jerry Rice, some local, Derek Thomas, the chief linebacker legend. I think Marcus Allen was part of that
Yeah.
too, and I'm sure Brett Favre. I mean, there's just a lot of iconic people and partnerships you worked on. So walk us through some of those.
The kind of the flow, if you will, of how it all came about. It started with World Cup 1994. So, for those who may not know who are listening, the last time the World Cup was in the U.S., the only time the World Cup was in the U.S. was in 1994, and there were 9 host cities, and Sprint became the sponsor, and it really was being a technology provider to the opportunity. So we had a virtual network and we linked the media center in Dallas. And so it really was the role of not only being a sponsor, but we're providing a tech, you know, um, solution here. So we work really closely with the World Cup organizing committee and their head of IT and head of technology and whatnot. But that was a case where in 1992, my boss, a guy, George Rodriguez, came to me and said, "We've got this opportunity. We've made this investment. We need somebody to manage it." The downside is that on July 18th of 1994, you don't have a job.
Right.
And so there was an expiration date on this thing. And so I had to make, kind of the decision of, do I want to take this risk or do I want to kind of, keep going? I was intrigued enough by the opportunity as well as the fact that it was sports marketing, which again kind of ties back to some of the earlier points in the career where I knew that if given the opportunity, wanted to marry, kind of my love of sports with the marketing piece. So assembled a team internally, assembled an agency team, and we went in and activated against the sponsorship. And it really was about taking a brand that didn't have the same level of awareness as, many of the other, brands that were involved with World Cup and establishing Sprint as truly a player, if you will, as well as we had Sprint International. And so they dovetailed into that business. So that was my first, challenge and opportunity, of which then became, many along the way, which have just, been a blessing in terms of a career standpoint as the things that I got to do. But the fact that we Sprint had success with that led the way to the NFL as the next big deal. We at that time had a PGA Tour stop. We had the NCAA partnership. But World Cup was really the stepping stone to the NFL deal in 1996. And that deal, when signed, was the biggest professional sports sponsorship ever, because it was a deal with the NFL as a league, with the Super Bowl, and then with the 31 teams. So we had individual agreements with each of those teams. So as part of our activation, as you mentioned, we had a stable of athletes that we utilized to help, both with advertising, but to make appearances at corporate hospitality events, because the key to us selling in the deal, which we had vetted and valued, was that there was a B2C component to this and there was a B2B component to this, from a corporate hospitality, as well as, again, providing technology to the league as well as to the teams.
Yeah.
So that was a great, again, relevant story for the brand to be able to say, we're the B2B provider, we're the telecom provider to the NFL. So you mentioned the headsets. We were at a point in the negotiations where Tim Kelly, who was at the time my boss, and I kept track, made 27 different presentations internally to ultimately get to a yes. But we were on, like, let's just say presentation 25 or 26. And there was just this need to have one more asset that we could put into the deal to make it kind of, get over the top. And so we went, and this is where, again, the value of great partners. We went back to the NFL and to the head of NFL properties, and we talked with them about the possibilities. And one of the things that we as a team had identified is that on the coach's headset at that time was a brand called Telex, which is was a very small brand. It wasn't a consumer brand. They were basically providing the sideline communications.
Right.
And we said, we had valued it in terms of the exposure at some level. And so I think the way we approached it was, for X amount of additional dollars, would you give us that real estate on the sidelines? Because the only other brand that had sideline visibility was Gatorade. And so the answer, ultimately we came to terms and agreed to that, and the deal was done. And that coach's headset component was a huge benefit because, again, we had sideline exposure. When we ultimately exited the deal, the NFL sold that real estate on the headsets to Motorola for the same price that we had paid for the overall sponsorship. So I've often told those guys, we created a category for you.
Right.
And look at it now. I mean, it's ubiquitous in terms of college sidelines, NFL, and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. You talked about, the 27 presentation, but you also talked about working with your agency partners. One of the things I felt about the early Sprint days when we were there is, you were contrarian to this because you came from the agency world, but we call our agency partners not partners, we call them vendors, and we were not so nice to them at all times. We, we're Sprint, you're not. And I don't know. Any thoughts on that? I mean, obviously you didn't do that, but I felt like, we had Carlson Marketing Group, J. Walter Thompson, Ogilvy. I mean, and I just think sometimes, I actually flew on the Sprint corporate jet to Carlson Marketing on a Saturday with Dave Smeek, who was the head of Consumer Services Group. We're a $2.2 billion division of Sprint at that time. And Dave Abrahamson and a few others were, emergency meeting. And it really wasn't an emergency. Now, it was cool taking the corporate jet, don't get me wrong. But, I mean, it was just it was something that didn't have to be so urgent. And it was it was a power move. But any thoughts on that type of environment?
Yeah, I have a strong point of view because Sprint was a shitty client. I mean, that kind of coming up within the ad agency business within Kansas City, that wasn't just a local belief or point of view, that was a national point of view.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I took as my own sort of personal challenge when hiring agency partners was, you guys are going to be partners. And it was a necessity because, I was given the assignment in roughly August of 92. So there was less than really 18 months to activate against the deal. And so they really did, the agencies that we had 2 agencies involved, really served as an extension of the team, which to me was what an agency was supposed to be. And again, I know I had that point of view because I came up,
right.
I cut my teeth on the agency side. But that belief and philosophy and sort of the way of working continued on when I, ended up managing agencies that did our advertising and brand identity and all of those sort of activities. I felt very, very strongly about the fact that agencies add value. They're not a vendor.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. And I didn't have that agency experience. So I was just being a human being, you just treat people like they are part of the team, right? That brings me to another question. Was it more fun going to events, dinners, when you're taking clients out when you were on the agency side, or was it more fun getting agencies to take you out to events, dinners, all that fun stuff?
I don't know. That's kind of a personal question. It was way, I don't know if it's way more, it was more fun being the recipient, where you're not worried about where do we have to go eat, how many people, and so forth. At some level, though, it also gets, candidly a little old, just, because there's almost like an expectation that the agency has of we need to take the client out. And I was always saying, please, we don't feel like this is, a mandatory by any stretch.
Yeah.
You mentioned some of the other, like the athletes and whatnot. I think those were interesting. One, it was a great opportunity, to meet some of those people and just see how they're wired and how they conduct themselves. We did a TV shoot at Soldier Field, and Brett Favre was one of the people, and he flew in. He landed by helicopter close to Soldier Field and came over.
Are you drowning in boring corporate communications? Palacio and Partners is here to rescue you. We transform internal podcasts from snooze fest to must-listen content that actually connects your team and strengthens your culture. Imagine podcast episodes that make your employees laugh while staying informed. Our founder, Jeff Palacio, doesn't just create podcasts, he creates conversations that break through the noise. Whether you're a growing startup or a massive corporation, we turn your company's story into audio gold. Leadership becomes human. Remote teams feel connected. Your message cuts through the clutter. Palacio and Partners, where corporate communications gets a fun makeover. Let's make your podcast work harder than your email inbox ever could. Jeff is happy to share his insights on podcasting with you. You can contact him via LinkedIn or schedule a Zoom call via the link in the episode description.
We did a TV shoot at Soldier Field, and Brett Favre was one of the people. And he flew in, he landed by helicopter close to Soldier Field and came over. And he had on a white t-shirt that looked like he'd slept in it, cargo shorts, and flip-flops. Now, granted, we were going to put him into a uniform, but
Yeah, right.
it was sort of shocking, this guy walking up like that. And I contrast that with working with Peyton Manning on a couple of TV spots. That guy was a pro from the get-go. There was nobody who came on set, even, from a professional talent perspective, who was more prepared than he was. So you could just see him take his on-field persona of being prepared and apply it to like every aspect of his business. And I think about that and I see what he's doing now. He's got his own production company. He wanted to learn,
Right.
and then utilize that learning to, have a pretty damn productive life after he was done with football.
Yeah, were there any surprises, like either this person is more magnificent than you thought they would be, or the reverse, where they were an a-hole? And you don't have to name names, but
I'm trying to go through kind of the mental checklist. There wasn't anybody that I encountered that was just a huge ass.
yeah,
Some of their agents could clearly, play that role because they were running interference for the player or the entertainer. The negotiation with Rolling Stones and dealing with the Stones was a challenge, maybe different than the NFL guys. People like Marcus Allen, Peyton, the Petty family that we, did work with were just tremendous people, and again, it was just a blessing to get to know them. I think Richard and Kyle Petty and Adam, who, sadly, died in a training in an accident, they were just a wonderful family. They are a wonderful family, and it was just great to get to know them.
So, Mike, talk about I was on the agency side supporting Sprint when the Nextel merger was announced. That spoiler alert, didn't end up well. But talk about that period at Sprint and your involvement in that.
So I'm probably going to get the years mixed up, but it was like late in the year during the holidays that I was first sort of like kind of brought into the tent about, hey, we're going to be doing this. We're forming a team. Clearly we need to figure out like, what's the brand going to be? How are we going to launch the brand? How are we going to launch the business? So you had that overall challenge once the companies came together as to what would that look like, what would the name be, what would the brand be, all those things. But also you had legacy relationships from agency standpoint, clearly, marketing and communications roles on both sides. So was part of the team that worked through that. And I remember like the first meeting was in Reston, Virginia, at their headquarters. But I remember the first meeting being like, you had sort of the Sprint crew and the Nextel crew in the same room, and everybody's sizing each other up.
Right.
It's like you were at a junior high school dance, and you just were trying to figure out what was going on. And I felt like I had a little bit of, I don't know if it was an advantage, but at least I had a connection with Nextel's CMO, who was Mark Schweitzer,
Right.
whose wife worked at Sprint back, in our early days. And I had met Mark. And so it's good to reconnect with him. But it was a challenge, but it was also just, again, a great time because of like the crew that we ultimately brought together and went off and built a brand and a positioning and a launch plan and launched the brand. And spent a hell of a lot of money in doing so, but work with really smart people, work with great agency partners, got exposed to, a lot of sort of new just leaders in their craft, particularly on the agency side. So that I look back with a lot of affection just because in a short, like roughly 8 to 9 months, we did all that work.
Yeah. Yeah. You were in the cone of silence in the
Yeah,
beginning.
there was the clean room and
Oh, yeah.
all the things, and it did make it difficult because you're trying to think, okay, like, can I say this? It was
Yeah, they had next to how their lawyers in the room, Sprint
right,
had their lawyers. Yeah,
right.
I've been involved in a couple of those, but
But that was clearly a time with a team that was brought together from both companies. There had to be a heck of a lot of trust
yeah,
to be able to do what we did within 9 months. And that for me was like, the people aspect of it was what I continue to remember is just how fun it was with that group of people
right,
because sort of the best and brightest who came together to go make this happen.
yeah. So kind of fast forward to March of 2012, you're now leaving Sprint. Talk about that experience, how it impacted you, and kind of what was your plan after 22 years of working for basically the same company in a lot
Yeah.
of different roles. But what was that like for you?
Well, again, I don't think I was prepared for it. It was a shock. I mean, it was a shock from the standpoint of like life is very different now. And one of the things when I left that I sort of like just made a pact with myself was the first thing I'm going to do is figure out what I don't want to do.
Right.
And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take 3 months of just intentional decompression. Because in the first week, I was approached, about a job, and I was just like, I don't even want to, I don't want to jump into something. I don't want to make a rash decision. I'm, thankfully in a place where I don't have to go right back to work. But I also set 3 months as the time frame because that would be roughly kind of the summer. Um, again, a decompression time, but it wouldn't be so long that I would be
Yeah.
sort of out of the game, if you will. And so probably had more cups of coffee with more people during that time frame than I have in, any year since.
Right.
Um, but talked to a lot of people, especially those that I, trusted and, knew would be objective about, okay, the possibilities. And so the first thing I did was start my own business, which is, business of one, doing marketing consulting, because I wanted to, during the 3 months I got to the point of where I was itchy, just feeling like I'm not doing anything. I mean, it was good to decompress because, as you know, one of the things when we were at Sprint, or at least late in that tenure for me, was you were basically on call 24/7. I mean, it was just like you never could really get away.
Right.
It took a while to just be able to move past that feeling of always on, always connected. But that was the right approach because I figured out what I didn't want to do and realized that starting my own thing felt kind of unique and different and felt like a new challenge that I would enjoy. And that I did for several months and was doing consulting for a local sports marketing agency called Premier Sports, and eventually hooked up with them because there was an opportunity there to work on the college football playoff and the launching of that because that was before the playoff was a reality.
Right.
But the college commissioners had agreed, or the conference commissioners had agreed to do it. So to be able to come in and again work on something from the ground floor up, lead a team, get the brand positioning together, work with an outside agency on the brand identity, help get it launched was a major opportunity and just again a great thing to be able to be involved with.
Yeah, the beauty of that, and I think you might have wrote the article, or I read an article recently preparing for this. Is this the beauty, the simplicity of
Yeah,
calling
was,
it the college football playoff,
right,
affectionately known as the CFP, right? So, but
right.
yeah, so talk about that process and how you guys came up with that, and
There was a lot of I would say pressure, but a lot of noise as we were going through it. That there was an expectation that this would be the college football equivalent of the Super Bowl.
right,
And so there was just, particularly in the media that followed kind of the machinations, and I think there was a belief that there was going to be some name that was going to be akin to the Super Bowl. We did consumer research, and one of the most intriguing things I've ever done was to go in, to be on the other side of a focus group wall and look at people talking about football, and to see someone sitting there with an Oklahoma sweatshirt next to somebody with a Texas sweatshirt, and they're getting along because they're talking about football.
Right.
And the things they're talking about are tailgating, pregame, band, cheerleaders, tradition, Cotton Bowl,
Right.
all the Red River rivalry. And what became clear is that fans were basically saying, we want a champion that's decided on the field of play, but we don't want you to screw around with our game because it's got this historic legacy, all of these traditions. And ultimately, the college football playoff was like the name because that's what it was.
Right.
And it was incredibly important to indicate to fans of like, for the first time ever, this is a playoff. The media is not determining the winner. There is a 4-team playoff, which of course now is 12,
Right.
to determine who the national champion is. And so we caught flack when it was announced because everybody was expecting something.
Yeah.
We'd come out with the name's college football playoff, and it
Yeah.
sort of like lands with a thud. But the reality is now look at the longevity and sort of the equity that's been built and the fact that that is what it is.
Right.
And so the story was Dennis Dodd, who actually lives here in Kansas City, writes for CBS Sports, said, Bill Hancock, who at the time was the head of the college football playoff, the name of his dog must be Dog, because and that's why I made sort of fun of that in the Substack articles. Like, yeah, sometimes simple is best, and in
Right.
this case, dogged worked pretty well.
Yeah. 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 So, before we talk about what you're doing now, I love your thoughts because we got a chance to work together again at United Way of Greater Kansas City. But what was it like for you? Obviously I have my own thoughts about it because that was my first not-for-profit organization that I had ever worked for. What were your thoughts? I know you were a fractional CMO at the start and then became the chief marketing and philanthropy officer for United Way Kansas City. So talk about that culture shift from, Sprint and then the small company that you're running at Premier. You had a pit stop at Barkley, one of the iconic ad
Yeah.
agencies currently in Kansas City. But talk about that experience at United Way.
It was a radical shift culturally. And when I went as fractional CMO, that hit me in the face, big time, because I was asking for things that I was getting, response looks like I had three heads. And I don't say that as some indictment on the staff as much as it is, it was the culture that was just systemic within that organization, which was also part of like an international organization. There's, as there's 1,300 United Way offices in the United States. So for me, the benefit was I had certainly served on civic boards and whatnot, but I'd never worked for a nonprofit. So that was something I wanted to do. And there was certainly a missional aspect to it. You're doing work that is improving the community, and there's a tangible aspect to that. But you're also working in a group of whatever it was, I think 55, 60 people, if I remember correctly, that, over-indexed on empathy and caring. And again, wonderful qualities. But at the end of the day, you're running a business. And sometimes when I pushed on what I'll call kind of the business process and prioritization and making tough decisions, there was more an attitude of like, let's boil the ocean and do everything, you
Right.
know. And we were, I think often an inch deep and a mile wide. And what I was trying to do was counter to that, which was like, we got to prioritize.
Right.
And that was a challenge. I think it was a challenge for the team, it was a challenge for me. But, I look back and again, am glad that I did it for 3 years. But it was a very different, again, dynamic than working in corporate America or kind of in the agency and service provider space.
Yeah. Yeah, I would share that sentiment. I think we were spoiled a little bit because one thing Sprint did really well, it was the training, like things we went through a whole total quality management training. I remember in the 90s with Sprint, and this I took things I learned from that and what I learned from Sprint and took it everywhere I went, and the 10 companies I worked with, work for, and in my client consulting. So I mean, just we were really spoiled, and again, it wasn't, especially in the early days, there wasn't many companies that moved at the speed we move. With the joke was, 1 year at Sprint is like 3 years at another company, right?
Right.
So,
No, I totally agree. And I think back, one thing I'd always, if it would, I'm intrigued by and would love to know the answers, like what has been the economic development to Kansas City of ex-Sprint people starting businesses?
yeah,
Because you and I know a ton of those businesses that have been started or have been led by Sprint folks.
yeah,
And I think of the training that you mentioned, what we got through University of Excellence and the things that we got, to learn because of our tenure there, I have applied over and over and over again since leaving.
yeah,
So, it makes me sad that the brand is no longer
yeah,
around and that it has dissolved. But at the same time, I take great pride in just the people that were produced from that, that brand and the work that's been done.
yeah. Yeah, the U of E, University of Excellence, was phenomenal. I went to a 5-day Stephen Covey, Seven Habits of Highly Effective Leaders. It was phenomenal. I mean, it really was. Public speaking, 2-day seminar. I mean, it was, they had a lot of great things there, for sure. You had mentioned George Rodriguez, and I just George was the most laid back. I don't know if his official title was CMO, but he was the most laid back executive leader of all time.
Yeah, no kidding. George, I love George. He just was so. I wouldn't say he was easygoing. I think laid back is the right term.
Yeah. No, he wanted to get shit done for sure, but he was, yeah. And George, thanks for those playoff tickets at the Garden, Bulls, Knicks. That was great. Thank you for that.
George was in his own way sort of a man-esque character.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, in his own way. Speaking of that, who is your favorite Mad Men character?
Roger Sterling. I mean, his one-liners and just
so good.
Yeah,
so good.
That show. I mean, again, I sort of got I wouldn't say a kindred connection, but because it's not like I'm trying to condone that environment. But I love the depiction of the old ad agency days, and someone like Peggy, who was Mary Wells Lawrence was sort of the inspiration for her character, and the writing and the acting was just like
so good. We were literally visiting some friends, and the husband had never seen Mad Men. We literally just watched episode 1. This is like last month,
right?
And it's just so good. I mean, it's so good. I mean, and some people say, well, that the treatment of women was terrible. Well, they weren't condoning it. That's what it was in the 60s.
Sadly, the agency business, and even I think now, still has a diversity issue, and that has been a focus, at least in my experience on the agency side. But yeah, it's not like the history there is something that you look on and say, hey, that was we can condone that because it wasn't good. But the type of work that came out of that period of time was pretty amazing, and some of the iconic ad names of that time really fed the great advertising that we saw that came after.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's chat what you're doing now. I know you have your own consultant, marketing consultancy, fractional CMO, and so let's chat about that and what you're doing.
Yeah, I've been doing this for what now? I guess 3 or so years. Sort of re-energized the consulting business coming out of the 3-year tenure at United Way. I like it a lot because I love to solve business problems. And so I position myself as a fractional CMO because what I've found is you have to give potential clients something tangible for them to understand, okay, what is it that you're going to do for me?
Right.
But ultimately, what always happens is that once I get an assignment, it turns into broader than marketing. It really is about trying to help solve business challenges, business problems, being the objective party that says you might want to think about this versus that. of late, it's been more in the nonprofit space, ironically. I think, again, where the United Way experience helped me in dealing with nonprofit boards. In both cases, it was leading a strategic planning effort, which is right in my wheelhouse. But then in August, formed a consortium with 3 other local businesses that are all in the sports entertainment experiential marketing space for the purposes of helping clients activate against sort of sponsorship investments, but in particular, helping them activate against World Cup 26, which will be in Kansas City. So helping regional brands think
Right.
about utilizing World Cup, you know, hopefully as an official sponsor, but if not, utilizing soccer as a platform in a time period where there's going to be a great deal, clearly, of visibility to that, plus the fact that as a host city, Kansas City is going to have 650,000 visitors in that 6-week time period in the summer of 2026.
Right.
So I've got a variety of things, sort of like I'll call them irons in the fire, that keep me busy, but I'm also not in a space that I want to go recreate my sprint days that were or
Yeah.
weeks. I like the pace of what I'm doing now, and I love kind of the focus on strategy, particularly brand strategy. So that
Yeah.
is if the focus. That's where it's been.
Yeah. Another guest on the corporate couch you're working with, Justin Rickless of the
Yeah,
Guild
I
Collective.
love
So
this.
yeah,
Yeah,
Justin's great.
yeah,
Great.
Justin.
Talk about great writer.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
have so much respect for, again, him having a vision and creating an agency and putting a culture into place and being, you know, seen as a great place to work and getting that kind of accolade. I think, that it's not surprising because I think he's a great leader and great people person.
Yeah. Yeah. And he has 5 kids too. That's the
Yeah,
other thing
right.
I
Have great respect for parents that can handle.
and he
the-
left a great job with the Kansas City Chiefs
Yeah,
to
yeah,
explore other things and yeah, obviously great experience. 1994 World Cup, the only one hosted in the United States. Now it's coming to the United States here in 2026. What do you think the impact to cities that are part of being a host city? I think Kansas City is the smallest MSA
yeah.
city involved in it, but give thoughts there because it's obviously a huge event.
Yeah, the difference with this World Cup too is that there are 48 teams, so they've expanded, the number of teams. In '94, there were 24. And the other unique thing about this World Cup in '26 is that it's, hosted by North America. There's 16 host cities, and Kansas City is the smallest of the 16. Um, but there are 11 of the host cities are in the U.S. The thing that I think American, I'll just say consumers, but sports fans maybe don't quite understand about soccer, international soccer, is the joy of international soccer fans is something that I've experienced in '94 and I had never seen before. Um, I was explaining the other day to somebody that maybe it's the fact that goals come at a premium, and so when they are scored, there is just this explosion of joy
Right.
because they don't happen a lot.
Yeah.
But I think that's also putting our sort of U.S. parochialism on the game when the reality is it's called a beautiful game for a reason.
Right.
The flow of the game, the passing, the footwork, the athleticism, the endurance, all the things. Um, I, in '94, being able to experience it, across the U.S. was, again, just seeing the commitment of international fans to come and follow their team, the joy in doing so, the passion. It's unique. I mean, again, I know we take pride in the NFL and college football and basketball and whatnot, but this is an event that is really different. And the thing about it, speaking just from Kansas City, again, 650,000 people who will come in and stay an average of 9 days. So it's an opportunity for these host cities to truly showcase, who they are. Um, and the plans locally is to try to do that. Clearly, the hoped for legacy is not only the infrastructure that's being put in place now to handle the traffic and the security and whatnot will, hold over beyond. It's the expansion of the streetcar being one example, but the visibility that you get, and in particular, the experience that international fans have coming to Kansas City, particularly those who are business people, there are plans being made to, like, how do we make this an economic development opportunity to think about businesses that may be attracted to locate here with a U.S. office, if you will. So
Right.
again, big, big, big opportunity for all of the host cities, but I think
Yeah.
Kansas City in particular is the smallest one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be amazing. Definitely.
Yeah.
Mike, I love asking great leaders like yourself advice for a recent college graduate about to navigate their first post-college career search and begin their career. I know you do a lot of speaking at various universities, especially your alma mater, KU, and talk to this demographic. But talk about how your advice there for them.
Probably a couple pieces of advice. The first is one that I unfortunately am stealing from Scott Galloway, who I follow. He's on a variety of podcasts,
Yeah.
and he says the people who say follow your passion are already billionaires, and I think he's right. His point, and I agree with it, is find something you like to do where you can also make money doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't about trying to make tons of money as much as you do need to make a living.
Right.
Make sure you're doing something that you really enjoy doing.
Right.
The other thing that I, when I do speak, and in particular if it's an undergrad course, they're always sort of looking for what's the magic answer regarding going and getting a job.
Right.
And the first thing I say is you need to kind of come to terms with a career is a journey, and I usually put up a slide where it's a winding road. I said it is not a straight line from A to B. You're going to have points in that career journey where you get to make a decision of, do you turn left, do you turn right, do you go straight, what do you do? And there are going to be times when in that career journey when something gets put in front of you that you didn't expect, a downsizing or whatever. So one, be flexible. But the second thing is be incredibly curious. Like in your first job, make it more than just what you're doing. It's like, how does the business operate? How do decisions get made? What's the process? How do I impact the culture? What do I want to know that I don't know? Versus just thinking very kind of specific against the job description for which you were hired. That's sort of the test lab to begin to see, are there other parts of the business that might be of interest to me?
Right. Yeah, I love that. If you go back to the time in your career where you became that first-time manager and had a group of people that you were responsible for, what advice would you have for those people that want to take that, leadership journey and actually be responsible for a team of people?
The thing that I see happen I see this happen a lot when someone gets sort of put into the position of, quote, being a boss, is that they suddenly feel like they have to become something different. When the reality is they were placed in that role because they excelled in what they were doing and were seen as having potential to now lead, be it 1, 2, or more people. So the key thing to me is like, be authentic, be genuine, be who you are. And that is your style. And sometimes you lead from the front, sometimes you lead from the back. But again, if you're not authentic, your team will see right through it.
Yeah. Yeah. Great advice. Mike, it was great to catch up over officially on a podcast. But no, love your career journey, and you're going to do great things, I know, and help Kansas City in the 2026 World Cup. So thanks for coming on the Corporate Couch.
Jeff, thanks for the invite, and congrats on the success of the podcast.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Well, it was great catching up with Mike to go down the Sprint, now T-Mobile memory lane for sure. But yeah, so many great things, and you forget Sprint was in a 3-dog race with AT&T and MCI back in the day. And I mean, Mike, if you look at, he was during the Sprint days, he was I forget what the publication was, but he's 100 most powerful people in sports, and he did things like 1994 World Cup. And that was the only time the U.S. has ever hosted a World Cup. Now it's coming up here. We're recording in March 2025. So summer, I believe, of 2026, we will be hosting again and in Kansas City. But that led to an NFL sponsorship, and that led to get the NFL sponsorship. I think Mike said they did 27 presentations internally, as well as to the NFL, to get that sponsorship, and then created a category where they had the Sprint logo on all the coaching headsets in the NFL, which was groundbreaking at a time for a consumer.
But internally at Sprint, that was a hard sell because it was so darned expensive.
Yeah. No, they sponsored NASCAR. They worked with all 31 NFL teams. Mike then, after 22 years, and you lasted longer than I did at Sprint, but in 22 years, he probably saw at least 50 layoffs.
Oh, yeah.
And he survived 49 of them. And also what's nice, I thought too, is this showing how, after a career in corporate, Mike became the president of a small sports marketing company. I think it was Premier Sports Management, then went to a non-for-profit after he was the fractional chief marketing officer there. And I really, we both worked there. I worked for Mike. And the differences between a not-for-profit and working for a not-for-profit and a for-profit company, a commercial company, he pointed those out, and it just is what it is. It's just, when people are considering going to a not-for-profit, you just have to think it's a little bit different type of culture and mentality that you just need to be aware of. Not good, bad, or indifferent, but just, it's just not the same.
Mm-hmm.
But Joe, what are your thoughts after your 20 plus years at Sprint?
Yeah, it was a little less than 20 years, it was somewhere around there. And I started out as a consultant there. And I remember Mike, and I remember every one of those sponsorships. And you and I both, one way or another, were responsible for reporting the results of those sponsorships. I remember one in particular. It was a sports sponsorship that I'm not going to say what it was for now. But when we reported on it, we discovered 18 new subscribers, 18, after spending tens of thousands of dollars on a sponsorship. And that's what Sprint did, The neat thing about Mike, I'm going to come back to that. You talked about the layoffs that he survived. In almost 20 years there, I survived every layoff except the last one. And
there you go.
I think everybody's going to say the same thing. But, he landed on his feet, and there were times when we would lay off 10,000 people on a single Friday afternoon. And every one of those people landed on their feet, and I think that's a remarkable thing with the American economy that's let you do it. I landed on my feet. It took a while. It took a summer to finally do it, but I landed, and I've got good memories from Sprint. I've got some mixed memories from Sprint too. Sprint was known for trying different things. They tried everything, and we've talked before about that people lie to market researchers, and boy, do they ever, right? And so one of the very first stories that he talked about at Sprint was the American Express story, where he said, people told us that they wanted one less card in their pocket, so if the Amex card and the Sprint phone card could be the same card, people liked it. And when they brought it to market, they found out that wasn't true. So you have to remember that. That doesn't mean you don't do market research, but you kind of take it with a grain of salt. You kind of have to temper it with other things. And if it doesn't work out, then let's set that aside and go on. Sprint was the best about doing that, just setting it aside and going on. So a lot of good memories, a lot of melancholy memories, a lot of things that I learned, a lot of things that I'm tickled to death for the experience that I had there.
And for those people listening, maybe under 35, possibly 40, a phone card was used when you're on the road, so you wouldn't have to have coins for a payphone or can get billing outside of wherever house or hotel you were at.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, and you usually went to a payphone, and I know a lot of people don't know what that is, but they see them in old movies sometimes, But you went to a payphone, you dialed an 800 number, and
there you go.
They did that for you. So
all right.
It was a lot of fun.
We'll talk about the Henry Ford Model T. You can get any color you want as long as it's black. Anyhow.
Black,
Joe, what words of wisdom do you have for our listening audience today?
You know, Jeff, I was walking through the woods one day, and it occurred to me, do you know what kind of bush you have to be on the lookout for? An ambush.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.